Welcome to Finding Your Inner Mr. Rogers. I'm Todd Faber, and I believe in a world of noise and speed, the most radical thing we can be is kind. We often think of leadership as being in charge, but Fred Rogers taught us that true leadership is about being in service to the dignity of others. Today, we're joined by Tim Garvin, a leader who has dedicated his life to the belief that we are at our best when we are united. As the president and CEO of the United Way of Central Massachusetts, Tim oversees a massive network of support that touches nearly every corner of the community. He is the man who coordinates the helpers that Fred Rogers always told us to look for. While many see the United Way as a fundraising agent, Tim leads it as a community nerve center. He doesn't just see statistics, he sees neighbors. He is a master of the logistics of love, taking the complex problems of a city and breaking them down into manageable, human-sized solutions. Whether he's responding to a global pandemic, addressing food insecurity, or championing early childhood education, Tim leads with a Roger-esque style of being fearless, a Roger-esque blend of tireless energy and profound empathy. He is a master collaborator who understands that the most complex problems, be it poverty, systematic inequity, and crisis, cannot be solved alone. Tim is the chief helper of the neighborhood, a leader who proves that when we combine our resources and our hearts, there is no such thing as a stranger, only a neighbor we haven't helped yet. Hey, Tim, welcome to the neighborhood.
I'm daunted by that introduction, and I thank you. And in trying to keep with the Mr. Rogers theme, it's all of us, right? And it's it's what you're doing with this podcast and everybody you're interviewing. It's all of us working together, and the people who reach down and pull us up, the people who lift us up, the people whose shoulders we sit upon. It's all of us.
Oh, and I certainly appreciate the sentiment there, and you are right, but you are one of those people. It is clear based on your entire career. So I'm thrilled to have you on. I'm thrilled that you're here, and I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you and learning more about how you have been such a tremendous leader in your community in a way that really resembles what Fred talked about, and being kind, being compassionate, and being empathetic. And we talked a little bit in the intro about the helpers. And as you may know, Fred Rogers' mother famously told him to look for the helpers in scary times. In central Massachusetts, you are the person who organizes the helpers. How do you lead a massive organization to stay nimble and human when the world is throwing such heavy weather at your neighborhood all at once?
It's a brilliant question. And again, I'm humbled that you would ask me. But a few things that I would say. The first is spend time with people. Listen, ask questions. And Todd, it's exactly what you're doing. Ask questions so that you get to know them, and then build your team. And your team is both the people you work with, who work for you, that you work for, and your team also is the volunteers that you can call upon. So that when that crisis, that disaster, that emergency happens, you have a few quick calls that you can make. And because of the strength of relationships, because of trust, because of time, because of delivery, they listen, and then they say, what can I do to help? And it's when that happens. And I would further say, as much as I believe that has happened in central Massachusetts and in Worcester in particular, I think that's happening all over our country. It's just not the news story. And again, with what you're doing, it's flipping the narrative and saying, this is the news story. We are a compassionate country that lives by the spirit and the ideals of helping others and helping our neighbors.
That's very well put and very true. And the reality is that we do need to highlight that more, so that people feel comfortable having these conversations, and hopefully they're the spirit that you guys put out there with what you're doing, it gets promoted and more people say, hey, I want to get involved, I want to help. And that's really the genesis of this, because we need more helpers. As compassionate as the country is, we still need more helpers, because I think there are more people who need assistance than there are people who can assist. And that's kind of the whole point of this conversation with you in particular. And because if we're together and united, right, the united way, we're always going to be better off. And when you hear things that Fred Rogers talks about, one thing in particular, he used to say that we live in a world where we need to share responsibility. And it's pretty easy because we get distracted with our own problems and our own things for somebody to say, well, it's not really my child. I don't really live there. I don't need to be involved. And so for you, as this leader who's gathering up these helpers and has these resources that you put in place, knowing that we still have more people in need than people who can help, how do you sort of break through that mindset of it's not my problem to help everyone realize that, hey, you know what? We're all neighbors, and the struggle that one person is having is kind of a shared responsibility for all of us to try to help when we can.
Um, I hope I do at least three things, and I hope I do a lot more. But to break through the noise and to get people to feel a shared empathy and shared responsibility. And the first is we promote the daylights out of trying to get people involved in community by volunteering, both the big things and the little things. And I like to talk about project, program, policy. Project is the one day. You're going out to build a playground. You're going to clean up a lot. You're going to our local high school and you're putting shrubs and bushes around to make kids feel welcome and that this is a beautiful place. Program is the more long, and it probably is the kind of stuff that you did or I did, and it can be the sports coach for our kids, or it can be at the spiritual place, or it can be that big brother, big sister, or that scouts leader. And then policy is, and Todd, I know you do a lot of this. You sit on boards and you help not to tell people what to do, but to create a governance structure whereby the best ideas can be floated and then acted upon and implemented. So one, we try and get people involved in volunteerism and involved in the community. The second is it's saying yes to every single opportunity, especially those where you think it's going to be a challenging or difficult crowd, to speak and to tell your own story. And then the third, lately we have been trying to focus both on the humanitarian aspect, but also on the economic aspect. When COVID came, things that so many people in the nonprofit world knew, there were two big things that happened. One is that if an individual was presenting with one problem, they probably had multiple problems. If they were hungry, they're probably living in substantial housing. They probably had an underpaying job if they had a job. They weren't getting health care. And so when they did have to get any kind of thing, they went to the emergency room, which cost a ton of money, and their problem was already acute or chronic. The second thing was that all that stuff that we do, it actually contributes not just to the economy, but to the greater good of the economy. When there is quality early education and care, it allows that $20 an hour mildly paid person to have a good job and not worry where their kids are and not be calling out sick and having people who rely on he, she, them, they,
Right.
to know that the job is stable and all those little things leading up to the big things are getting done. When COVID came, one of the first requests we had was for an emergency license for full-day childcare at our local Worcester Boys and Girls Club. And immediately we thought this is going to be for the doctors and the nurses. But we also found out it was for the postal workers, the letter carriers. We found out it was for the truck drivers who kept items going across the country. We found out it was the laborers in the fields, the farm vegetable and apple pickers, so that we actually had fresh food. And when we start thinking of we're taking care of them and their kids, but it's also helping us, it shifts that dynamic, and it's really important. I look forward to the day where the Heritage Foundation talks about the economic value of the nonprofit sector for the total economy. Not that it's 18% of the labor force in America, but that it contributes to every single aspect of our economy.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think you're right that people don't realize the impact that nonprofits have simply beyond the direct services that they provide. You know, it was interesting years ago, and I don't know if we had met through that or not, but you know, I chaired the New England Innovation Awards for about a dozen years, and one of my first acts as chair when I first took over in like 2008 was I carved out an award for nonprofits because I felt that nonprofits were under recognized by the community at large, and for a nonprofit to sort of be placed in the same award category as a, you know, life sciences company, for example, just never made any sense. And that as great as and important as the life sciences companies were and what they were doing, the reality is that nonprofits kind of need that recognition more, because what it does is it, because nonprofits don't just make money because people invest in it because they're going to get something out of it. People invest in nonprofits because of the intrinsic value of it, right? We never get, we don't get something really back. It's that intrinsic thing. And it's hard for people to wrap their arms around it. And I think when you can quantify it in the way you did relative to the impact it has beyond just those that you're serving, it'll go a long way in getting more funding towards it, getting more people involved, and I think that's great. And certainly going to like a Heritage Foundation and saying, hey, it's important to acknowledge this. It's listen, it's no different than I talk about my wife who's in education and saying that teachers are the most underappreciated, not only just from the standpoint of how society views them, but how they're compensated, right? You can't have doctors, you can't have professional athletes, you can't have actors. All the people that are sort of the higher paying jobs wouldn't exist without teachers. And I think the same goes true in terms of how the nonprofits operate in the world and the impact they had. So I think that's great. And you know,
And Todd, let me, and I apologize.
no, that's okay.
I was not singling out the Heritage Foundation for any political reason. I
No,
think
no, no. You were just making an example. I get it, but
and
I was just sort of,
it would do exactly what you talked about the innovation awards. It would elevate a field that all too often is pushed aside and said, yeah, that's nice. Except that it's not nice. It's important, it's valuable, and the people who choose to make a career of it, myself included, um, we appreciate the value. And when that recognition comes, it helps us to do our job better.
yes,
I'm sure you've heard we all of us talk about the triple bottom line, right? Well, right now I talk about the grand slam of the economy. And slam is intentional, and grand slam because it's four runs. We have inflation, we have government grants and loans constricted. Nothing wrong with that, that's fine. We have more competition, more nonprofits trying to pop up saying there's a need. And we have, according to every trade magazine in philanthropy and nonprofit world, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, that fewer people are giving. So those are four things that exacerbate each of them. So if the Heritage Foundation, if the Washington Post, if the Wall Street Journal, if the most liberal and the most conservative think tanks all recognize the value, so that somebody who has never thought about making a donation, who maybe can be that big ticket person and say, I wonder what I could accomplish with 10,000, with 100,000, with $1 million. And again, even those innovation awards or Project Warrior, instead of thinking every year, how are we going to make budget? Imagine just for a minute, let's focus on constant instead of constantly having to raise money. So
well,
that credibility is important.
I, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one, because you want to, you need money to provide the services, and you need great leaders and compassionate leaders to get people to donate the money. But yes, it would be wonderful if that was secondary. But when you look at the role of almost every CEO in any sort of traditional nonprofit, the main focus is raising money. And it's a shame because it shouldn't be the case, but it is. But having leaders like you that are passionate about it and can find ways to bring folks in, goes a long way, for
And
sure.
even
And
behind you, there is a picture of Mr. Rogers. And this is Finding Your Inner Mr. Rogers, right?
yes,
And there is those of us in the nonprofit field watch it frequently. There is a time where public TV was going to be cut. And
yes,
Mr. Rogers truly went to Washington
I
and
remember.
testified and talked about what his show did for kids and families and reducing violence and creating empathy and helping kids to graduate and have a better life. And the most vehement distrust anti-public TV were convinced in a moment. So
Oh,
even
I
though
remember
his
that. It was 1968. He testified, and you could see the light bulb
you
in
weren't
the.
alive, you weren't alive then.
But I've watched it, even though it was
Okay.
black and white. I watched it, but I remember it's the congressman with the glasses and the mustache. He looked like my Uncle Arnold, and it
But
was amazing.
it gets back to the
Sure.
question you asked me. You know, with all this, I welcome the idea, if people are being honest and objective and open, to walk into a place that is going to be anti what my work is and being able to explain it. And some might still be against, and that's okay. That's freedom of choice. We want that. But if a few can be convinced or hear the inspiration or say, you know what, that could have been my grandfather that you're helping, or maybe that's my son. I want to give this another chance. I want to rethink it. That's what we ask.
And I think that that's a great mindset to have, because we there are significant problems, right, that you deal with in your role, including things. This is we talked about before, though. It's not my child. It's not my problem. And three things that I know you deal with pretty regularly within the United Way umbrella is homelessness, hunger, and isolation. And Fred Rogers used to say that anything that's mentionable is manageable. So we don't look at homelessness as an unmentionable. It has to be talked about. And so we look at those three things I just mentioned. How do you use your platform to mention those struggles in a way that doesn't make people feel so guilty that they just don't want to deal with it, but instead it invites them in to say, hey, how can I be a helper in this situation to find a solution?
So it's going from the name of the issue and the pie chart and the bar graph and the statistic to trying to make it as human as possible and telling stories. So on, I think it was October 1st, the federal government shut down. And by shutting down, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, was paused. It meant people who relied on that $6 a day weren't going to have that amount of money to be able to supplement, or in fact, for some, buy food. And we announced we were going to do something. And that Friday night at 5 o'clock, there was a knock on our office door. There were 2 or 3 of us still there. And there was a woman whose name was Mary. And she was in her 70s. And she stood at the door, and I opened the door, and she said, how do I get money so I can buy food? And I said, well, Mary, we're working that out. And she said, well, I'm unemployable. I live on Social Security and SNAP. I have macular degeneration, so I can't see well enough to have a job. And I admit we had a few food gift cards that we gave to her, but we told her what we were going to do. Mary could have been my older sister if I had a sister. She could have been your mother. She was not destitute. There were no issues other than she was unemployable because of her age and her physical disability, and she was going to be hungry if we didn't help. And that humanized it. So that's number one. The second, in this week, we have a groundbreaking for 4 tiny homes. And tiny homes, I think they're 452, not 452,000, 452 square feet.
Yes.
It's probably the size of your college room. 4 of them on a piece of land in Worcester that was in tax abatement. Nobody had paid taxes. Nobody would buy it. It's not a great piece of land. So we cobbled together some money, and we bought it, and we collaborated. We put the team of helpers together. And one of those helpers happens to be a really great architect. His first name is Sean. And he designed unbelievably beautiful tiny homes. When I brought the brochure, the mock-up of what it looked like home, and my wife saw it, she said, "Why aren't we moving to one of those?" I'm not sure I yet want to live in 452 square feet.
Understood.
The beauty of it with solar panels on the roof, which doesn't reduce, it reduces, it doesn't take away the need for energy, but it lowers the cost. Energy efficient, well landscaped with collaboration, designed by others, funded by the state, by the city, by private philanthropy, and by businesses. And everybody who's involved feels great about it. And is four enough for the four people who otherwise would be homeless? It is life-giving. But what we also hope is that it becomes a story in our local newspapers and throughout the United Way system so that other United Ways across the country can say, we can work with our city to get abandoned land, to convert it into something good, to reduce the issue of homelessness, which you're right, people don't want to talk about, they don't want to see, they don't want to recognize it. And it reminds me, the last thing I'll say about it. A friend of mine, and I'm sure you've heard this, has said, nobody when they're 6 or 12 or 18 or 20 says, I want to become homeless when I grow up. And it's a series of cataclysmic, awful events. And then they are. So what are we going to do about it? 4 won't solve it, but it's a start. And does 4 lead to 40 next year and to 400 the year after that? Bring it on. Let's do it.
I think that's wonderful. And I think you're right. It's important to be able to show people. And again, it sort of takes it down to our baseline, right? Like we have a shared humanity, whether you are the CEO of the United Way, whether you're just a schlump like me, whether you're somebody who's homeless, whether you're a young child, it doesn't matter. We all have that shared humanity. And when you can put it in a way that shows people we can be helpful based on that shared humanity and based on a need that exists not through anyone's fault, but just because of circumstances, that goes a long way in storytelling. But, you talk about, when you're 6, that's not what you want. And, we talk about children, right? And obviously Fred Rogers had a huge passion for the littlest neighbors, as do you. As you've done incredible work with early childhood literacy and care. So I guess it kind of begs the question I would have is that as a leader of a multi-million-dollar organization, you still view the world through the lens of a 4-year-old child that needs to feel safe and successful. And how is it that you go about that?
In some ways, I hope I don't regret saying this. In some ways, I'm a simpleton, right? And I can read treatises on poverty and thick reports, and some of them are amazing. But what it really comes down to is, how do I want to be treated? If it were me, if it were my kids, and treat others as you wish to be treated yourself. And when we talk about early childhood and we talk about early literacy, for too many years we thought kids in vulnerable neighborhoods, their parents just weren't as smart as we were. And then I believe it was Johns Hopkins that did a 10-year or a 20-year longitudinal study and found that they didn't start at the same place, but on that XY axis, they learned at the same level. And then the summer came. And then they learned at the same level and the summer came. And by the time a child living in a vulnerable neighborhood, in a high poverty area, there could be more than a year gap that Easily. They were never going to catch up to by the 5th grade. And then the humanity of that. So we just threw away our most precious resource. The economy of that. My gosh, that child's never going to have the earning power, never going to pay the same taxes. And I shouldn't say never. It's going to take acts of hope and magic to finally bring those two together. And so what we did, not me, people I work with who are really brilliant, they said, well, if it's the summer that the gap is growing, let's hire public school teachers. You talked about your wife. We love public school teachers. They are saints and heroes.
Yeah.
Let's put them into a camp setting, and we aren't going to go from swimming to kickball to reading. We're going to create what we call a language-rich environment. And that language-rich environment, we're going to, in staff training, make sure that everybody is using a lot of language so that that child who's growing up in a place where there's not a lot of talking will all of a sudden have their vocabulary lifted up. And we administered, not we, the camps that we funded with this summer literacy initiative, we administered a pre and post test called the Dibbles test. And every one of your listeners and watchers can look up Dibbles, dynamic education, and I don't know the rest of it. And we found that something like 89 to 93% were either maintaining or actually gaining during the summer. So that's great for the individual child. That's great for the future of our country. That's great for our economy. That can reduce crime. It can reduce emergency room visits. That's good for all of us. And the cost, it was because people donated to the United Way. It wasn't based on tax dollars. It didn't cost anybody anything other than somebody saying, yeah, I can make that $100 donation. And when we pulled it together through the United Way, it turned into $75,000. It's exactly what you're talking about with your entire podcast series about channeling your inner Mr. Rogers. And it's getting everybody to say, that can be me too.
I think it's wonderful. And I think, when you talk about these kids and the vulnerability that exists within their neighborhoods, you take it a step further. What you're also really doing, and you can see it, because, I think I might have mentioned, I ran, almost 30 years ago, one of the largest truancy intervention programs with the state attorney's office in Dade County Public Schools in the country. And the idea there was they looked and found that kids that started skipping school at an early age were the most habitual juvenile offenders in their teen years. And kids don't skip school at 6 because they're like, yeah, Mom, I don't want to go to school today. There's circumstances that happen. But then as they start missing school and they don't have sort of that early childhood care that you guys do, especially with just reading, school becomes frustrating for them. And when it becomes frustrating and people then view them as a problem as opposed to figuring out what a solution is. And you, through the United Way, are all about solutions. And you have to find solutions with your helpers and with other people, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't feel authoritarian, right? But feels like you can influence them by showing what the programs are that you've done, what the history is, and just through your personality, through your kindness, and through your empathetic nature. And so I guess it really does beg the question. You've got these great programs, you have these ideas, but how do you really go ahead and convince people to give their time and money to an organization like yours or the programs that you guys have? We mentioned, I think we talked about a little earlier, we talked about a little earlier, Fred Rogers testifying before the Senate, right, in 1968. And he was so soft-spoken and so honest with the folks at Congress in a way that just came across as genuine but quiet. And so you sort of have a similar demeanor. Well, you do. You do. And so
I would, if there were a big, nobody would ever use the word relaxed with me.
Okay, but we'll take the word relaxed out of it.
Is real. So passionate is real, and that's not going to play to everybody, and that's okay. But it's a combination of things. It's putting the time in, it's being authentic, it's listening, it's answering, it's being honest. So if somebody says, well, what about? Well, yeah, we've had things that we've tried that have failed. We all have.
Yes.
And it's okay to say that, or to say we're learning, or to say we're going to try this. And again, some of those unmentionables, homelessness, um, somebody who's living with substance abuse disorder, refugees, immigrants. Those are really challenging words.
Yes.
And yet there are needs. And those needs transcend just the individuals. And there are times where people are probably going to get upset with us. Um, but I think putting the time in, showing results, being excited about the results. So this morning, we presented to the core leadership team of UMass Medical Center a bunch of really amazing, unbelievable doctors and administrators who save lives. That's their job. And we 5-minute talk about the United Way, and it was good. They all were paying attention. They all were nodding, and then it's, and we're asking if you can help. We're asking if you'll consider making a donation, and if you have in the past, would you consider increasing it? And they're still nodding. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm totally going for it. And then I said, so here's where it's a little unusual. If and when you make that donation, I want you to see yourself as influencers, not just in the circles that you work in, but in the neighborhoods you live in. And I want you to take out your cell phones and whatever social media you're on, or send an email to all of your neighbors that you play golf with or you go out to dinner with and say, I feel great. I donated to the United Way to help my community today. They are going to continue to respond to hunger, to homelessness, to creating youth opportunities, and to stepping in and stepping up when there are disasters and emergencies. And one person said, isn't that, I think the term they used, self-aggrandizing? And I said, it can be, but you're doing it to say, if I can do it, so can you. And that's what we're doing. We aren't saying I'm better than you. We're saying join us.
You're saying come along with me because this is something that is beneficial to the community at large that I'm not inuring any real benefit from because I'm just donating my money or donating my time and I expect nothing back. And yeah, I agree with you. I mean, yes, some people can see it as self-aggrandizing, but it's not. It's not like saying, "Hey, I just made XYZ doing XYZ," right? It's, "Hey, I did this. I'm no better than you, so you should do the same." And but it takes a lot to make that ask too, right? You have to have confidence in what you're doing, but you have to be genuine in your messaging. You have to show that you're being compassionate towards the purpose, right? That I'm not doing this because I'm hoping to get something out of this. I'm doing it because it's the right thing. I'm doing it because I see the problems that people have on a daily basis. And as a leader, and we're all leaders within the community because we've had these opportunities that others don't, we have a responsibility to give back for the benefit of others to help them rise up, right? And even in a corporate environment, right? A great leader will be empathetic to his team in an effort to get them to be more productive within their job because they want to feel like they're a part of something. And I think that the messaging, obviously, that you had for UMass was, hey, don't you want to be a part of something?
But
And
you're totally right. Years ago, I was invited to speak to a graduating class of a bunch of MBA students. And it was put together by some company. And it was BU, BC, Brandeis, and Bentley, the B schools. Truly. I'm shocked Babson wasn't in there, but And there were 4 recruiters who each spoke, and they were all great. And I was intentionally the out of left field. I was the nonprofit guy. And not only am I a nonprofit guy, my wife and I were in the Peace Corps. And so I complimented the 4 other people. The person from Target was the single greatest recruiter I've ever heard. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this? I want to work for Target. I'm serious. Right. But I said, so here's what I want. And I said this to a group of 250 students who were about to graduate. They all had 3.8s. They were all going to be great. I said, so go on to whatever company you're going to work for, or whatever company you want to work for, or whatever company your mother or father worked for. And the opening page of their annual report is, the corporate da-da-da-da. And then usually there's a letter from the president. And I said, then go onto LinkedIn and look up the president of that company. And by the third thing, if they went to XYZ business school, they won this award. And then it's going to start listing their social responsibilities.
Yes.
It's going to start listing what they've chaired. This entrepreneurial, throwdown class. They are head of the Met Gala. They are president of the American Red Cross. And I said, so if you're all coming in, 250 of you, and you're all the same, you're all great, what's going to be the thing that sets you apart? Now, do it because it's going to be good for you. But I'll guarantee once you start doing that, you're going to feel great about it. And some of you might say, you know what? How do I shift out of this corporate world into this nonprofit world? And that's because we need you. We need the talents that you have in our nonprofit world too.
Yeah. It's because it's important to have, we always talk about it important to have a work-life balance, but there's that third component as well. There's that humanity piece of it, right? And that goes beyond your personal life with your family and your friends and goes towards the greater community at large. And when you're in a position to do that, and even if you're really not, I mean, I encourage my girls, even at a younger age, hey, you need to give back. I mean, I think I told you the genesis of this podcast was my 95% rule, where I told the girls when they were little, you need to find a way every day to help somebody else who is less fortunate. And whether it's putting a smile on somebody's face or helping them with something, putting the effort in to do it, even if you don't accomplish it every day, you got to put the effort into it. And it becomes sort of part of the fabric of who you are as a person. And that's that third prong. And so I think the messaging that you put into those graduates is huge, because you teach them at a relatively younger age, before they've got bogged down in their work life, to say, I have to carve out a piece of my day or a piece of my week for this.
So I hope someday I am actually invited with the robes to give an address to a graduating business school.
Yeah.
And what I would say is, when I was growing up...
I'll make some calls.
Yeah, stop that. Not yet. When I was growing up, every January 8th, January 10th, my dad would sit at his desk in our home, and he would get out his green bar paper, and he would do an accounting of our family's investments. What stocks did he buy, and when did he sell, and did they do well, and how much did he make? What did he then invest in? And I watched. So he wasn't trying to model for me, but I learned a lot from that. And what I would say to a graduate school, to any school, is I'm giving you a journal, and I would like to give each one of them a journal. And do it for yourself. Don't do it for public recognition. But that first week of January, I want you to write down every donation you made, every volunteer event you were in, every time you said yes, when you saw a GoFundMe and you threw $25 in, when you went on the walk for hunger, when a friend of yours said, can you be a judge for and you said yes. And list that for the year. And then sit back and then write how you feel about it. Then go out for a walk and then come back in and say, and here's how I'm going to increase it the next year. And it's exactly what you are doing or have done or are continuing to do, you and your wife with your daughters, of saying, be intentional about it. And if you keep that journal, by the 5th year, you're going to think, I need another journal.
Because yes, that's the hope, right?
It's going to become part of your life.
Yes.
And how inspired. And again, not to say, hey, look at me, I'm great, but wow, I feel good about myself. And then maybe you're as lucky as the two of us, and you get a life partner and you have children, and they see what you're doing. And then they say, you know what, Dad, yeah, but he's actually really cool. And when I hear my girls and my son, not when I'm ever around, talk about the kind of work I'm involved in, and they're talking about it with such pride, I realize, okay, Life is pretty beautiful. And I know your daughters do that about you.
Sometimes. I hope.
I
I'm sure they do it about their mom. Let's put it that way. That's for sure. Well, so that's a nice little segue, though. When we talk about other people in our lives, uh, Fred Rogers always said that real strength has to do with helping others, and in your job, helping others who are the most vulnerable people in our communities, um, and you do this every day. Where do you go to find the helpers when you sort of need to be, I don't know, like loved into being so you can keep leading us, right? Because we need you. Like, while there's opportunities for all of us to sort of figure it out on our own, having someone like you to steward the ship in this world because you can lead with compassion, you lead with kindness, and you're incredibly empathetic. We can't lose somebody like you. And I'm sure there are days that are hard. And so where do you go to kind of get that reset?
So I'm going to give two very different. I'm going to answer a question you didn't ask, and then I'm going to answer that second part.
Go right ahead. It's your podcast.
My contention is that by and large, people want to do good, but they don't know how or where. And so my job, my team, my board, the people I work for, our job is to unlock that. And in any way we possible, making it easy, making it simple, thanking them, complimenting them so they're going to want to come back. The second part, on those bad days, and we all have bad days.
Yes.
It's having a team around you, right? And it starts with my wife. You talked about your wife. My wife, Teresa, is a saint. And she listens and she puts up with me, and every single thing that's good in my life since I've been about 25, joining the Peace Corps, moving to the greater Boston area, having kids, accepting the job at the United Way, being involved in COVID rather than burying our heads in sand. It's because of my wife, Teresa. Every single thing. And the secondary part is the people I work with. It is, I think there's a boxing term, punching above your weight. There's no way our 13-person, $11.5 million United Way should be able to do some of the things we do. And I have gotten fortunate and lucky and blessed, and it's serendipity and it's coincidence and it's magic that I work with 12 people who don't say no, but say, how can we? And that's just changing the answer. And my job reflecting back to them is when they come with ideas to do the same. How can we? And it's what you came up with, the idea of a podcast. And you and I sat a couple of weeks ago and you showed me the list of the people you were going to ask. And instead of this being 12 chapters, it looks like it's about 60 and going to grow from there. This might be a 5-year endeavor. Great. Because you had an idea and enough people said yes and are excited about it. When you put this idea out on LinkedIn, and I didn't even realize my name was in it, I started seeing, 250, not just likes, but written responses. Something, who is this guy? Nobody gets 250 people to respond on LinkedIn to an idea. And you did. So it's surrounding yourself with people who say, how can we? Instead of how can't we?
And I think that's a great point, but certainly in your case, people are wed to a mission, right? They're wed to the mission of United Way. But at the end of the day, if they don't have faith that their leader is going to have their back, is going to be responsive, is going to be empathetic, is going to be a support system for them in their ideas, then it goes nowhere. And this goes back to the genesis of why I asked somebody like you to participate, because you embody that. And it's important for people to know that you can find the success on this small budget with a small staff and have this great, huge impact because you have somebody in a leadership role who inspires the people around them to do that because they listen, they interpret, they provide opinion, but they don't come across as authoritarian in terms of how they present things. Well, my way or the highway. And that's the whole purpose of this, is to highlight that. And so I so very much appreciate you taking time out of what you told me before we started talking today was a very busy day and a very busy time, and to be able to share your stories and to share your experiences and your process and your leadership with the rest of folks, I hope will not just inspire or continue to inspire the people that work with you, but the people that don't even know you, to say, hey, there's a better way. And I like the Tim Garvin way. So with that, I so appreciate you taking the time to chat, and I look forward to hearing more from you. And I'll start, like, when you're ready, I'll start making calls to deans of some of these business schools and get you in front of them.
Todd, thank you. Not just for all the kind things you said to me. Thank you for doing this. I look forward to watching each podcast because of who you've put on and what I can learn. And isn't that, I'm a 67-year-old person and I still want to learn. What more can I do? And that's the way it should be for all of us. So thank you.
You are very welcome. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
Take care.